I was watching the news and I saw someone asking why the ongoing illegal protests outside of judges' homes, Supreme Court judges in the United States of America, to effect the changes of a ruling that's coming up and promises of Supreme Court of the United States, like they're actually going to go to the court itself and riot in DC in that general area if the ruling does not go as these people want, are not being investigated, and I have three things to say about that. What they are probably doing already, and they am here talking about the powers that be, the Federal Bureau of Inquisitions and the Central Inquisition Agency and other parts of the state. And the three things about that are what they are probably doing already. Next is why they may not dislike what's going on. And lastly, what they certainly do not want to tell us about what they're doing or is going on. As I was drafting this, got the announcement that about 10 a.m. in the morning in the United States of America in front of the Supreme Court, getting some live video there showing that the actual Roe v. Wade was overturned. So some of the things I was discussing in the rest of this presentation, which still works on the general thing, regressives don't like investigating regression, we're going to see some tests with some of these. What are the people going to act on? What do those protests in front of Judge Kavanaugh's home actually result in? What is the coverage going to be from this? Some people are celebrating, of course. Some people are going to be very upset. So we're going to see what happens with this. But the whole key idea of regressives don't investigate regression still stands. And I think a big part of that is because they're regressing. They're going backwards. So they go back to a certain position, they set that position, and that's the floor. It's not even a situation where they're digging a new foundation in order to build something new on. They just want everybody to be at that floor. If you build things, they want to dig under you to get you to that floor level. So whenever something happens that's still at that floor level that they've reset, it doesn't really seem odd. But if you are really about progress, you'll always be concerned about the things that are happening underneath you, that are happening behind you, what you're building on. You'll be concerned about what happened there. So if there's weakness in that, you look back and investigate. But if you're just about undermining, you don't really care about investigating what's happening above and around you. First section is tradecraft. If you look at the general nature of the current administration and the bureaucracy that's kind of embedded, it's been there during Biden's time, it's in there during Trump, was also in there when Obama was president and Biden was vice president. These people are not people who will prosecute the people, the kind of people involved in these protests and demonstrations and things that are going on. So if you actually think about that, I'm kind of glad that they're not wasting the time and money investigating. Or at least not another investigation, because this is also assuming that they would tell anyone if they already had ongoing investigations that were already wasting time and money. I'm not saying spooks are involved in the entrapment sort like they did with the Whitmer kidnapping case where they're actually instigating the thing. I think it was something like around 12 people were involved and half of them or so were actually FBI informants and things like that. So I don't think it's to that point where this is initially actually initiated by agents of the state. I think this is genuine grassroots terrorism of sorts, that people actually want to go out there and commit acts of violence and intimidation in order to get political ends. I think that's kind of what they're doing, but it might not be technically completely 100% terrorism, because terrorism is supposedly, I think, just two citizens, random citizens, where this is more targeted towards people who they consider to be maybe on the opposite sides. And I don't know. Okay, so however, I expect that enough people in these different institutions, in these different organs, are watching to be able to try and prevent actual violence, like when that recent person was apprehended with a gun. I think they had some eyes on this person. And any genuine new investigatory efforts would likely be hampered by announcing it too. Like if you say it, then the people will be online. Who's new? Who's new joining this group? I think it will pique their interest and they won't be able to investigate as well. But one of the comparisons people say is, oh, how come there was that note saying they're going to investigate the parents who were going and talking to the school boards and things like that? I don't think that was an actual intention to have a full-on investigation. I think a big part of that was actually to appease the regressive complainers and powerful teachers unions and those kind of groups and things like this, those people who are political kind of organizers for the Democrats, for people who are supporting this, and hopefully scare off some parents into backing off. I think just the fear of possible possibly being under investigation, they thought would actually reduce the amount of people who wanted to actually go to these various school board meetings all over the place. At least that's how I read it. I could be wrong. Maybe there was actual investigations actually taken out in it. And whether I'm right or wrong about that specific thing, I think in this particular case, the current administration and the bureaucracy and those people do not want the protesters to actually stop or have anyone who supports those protesters or at least claims to understand the need of why some of these people need to do those kind of things that they're doing to back off and not be as fired up as they are at this time. Okay, second part, tools of the trade. Assuming most in the administration and the bureaucracy actually don't want this to escalate, despite collectivism being inherently violent, the at-home protests in the neighborhood and things like that, and the cordoning off of the Supreme Court building itself, just continues the precedent of protesting specifically Kavanaugh that was set from his confirmation hearings. These kind of activities fall under love crimes. Like back then, it was a love crime to do that, to knock on the door, to be banging on the doors of the Supreme Court, to be standing up in the crowd and protesting and engaging in other sorts of tactics of intimidation and aggression and things like that. That was a love crime for the greater good. And these things that are currently going on, at least talking about the Kavanaugh situation and possibly the stuff that's been going on in DC so far when you're standing in front of steps and kind of cordoning off areas and things like that. These are love crimes of the misdemeanor level. And if you want to compare the love crimes to hate crimes get higher scrutiny and punishment than the equivalent sorts of crimes without hate. Like if you just steal somebody's car, but then they somehow find it you stole this person's car because you don't think these kind of people deserve to have vehicles. That's looked at in a different sort of way. And the inverse of less scrutiny and more forgiveness applies to love crimes. So if you take a car away from somebody because you're saying this person might harm these other people and I'm protecting these other people from this person being harmed, this person using the car to harm them, it will be looked at in a different kind of way. Like, yes, you kind of broke the law, you stole that person's property, but we agree that this person is going to do that, or we agree somehow that you taking that actually protected these other people, so we're kind of okay with that. That's kind of the system in there. And if they actually give added scrutiny to the protests relating to Kavanaugh right now with the media and the bureaucracy and starts announcing investigations, that would also raise the chance of reminding people how much the Democrats and others supported the protests during the actual hearing. And I don't think that's something that they want to remind people. Because currently, most people think of that hearing about some of the thoughts they come from. And I just saw a recent interview, I think it was with Joy Reid and Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris was being interviewed about that. That's one thing they remember, how brave and stunning Kamala Harris was compared to how horrible and boorish the Republicans were to the strong black woman nominee, Ketanji Brown Jackson, in her hearing recently. Oh, that was so politicized and so just uncouth, and I can't believe they did that. But back then, that was brave and stunning Kamala Harris getting onto the national scene and breaking out, and now she's a vice president. And another thing, if they actually remind people about this hearing, the way people actually remember it is how patriarchy shut down a survivor of abuse, just like how they're railing against Amber Heard now. Like, these people in court, these brave and stunning women come out, and one of them was trying to take this man, and then the man was actually talking about this woman and things like that. That's how people remind it. They don't want people actually investigating their memory of it and actually remembering that, wait, there was some really shiesty type of things going on back then, and that was condoned then. That also didn't really have that much coverage, and then now they're covering what happened. They don't want people to think about these things. Now, there's a difference between what was going on in the court back then. Even the whole banging on the actual door of the Supreme Court. Yes, it's uncouth. Yes, I don't think that's something you'd actually arrest someone over. You shouldn't encourage that kind of talk, saying, you'll reap the whirlwind and things like this. I don't think that's a positive thing to do. But there's a difference with those kind of words. There's a difference with what's going on in Kavanaugh's neighborhood now. Yes, it's disruptive. Yes, it's technically illegal, but I can understand where they're like, is it really as bad? But one of the things that's actually different with that is the threatened escalations and the actions that have actually happened in other places, such as the firebombings, destruction of property. Those shall be discussed more in the next section. However, those things also already fall under other general crimes that are being investigated at those various levels of the judicial system. Like in the different states where these firebombings have happened, I'm sure there's actual police there looking into it there. They might be able to find the actual people there. I don't think that's not happening. I think that's already happening. And I definitely don't think they'd be as standoffish about what's going on in Kavanaugh's actually neighborhood, if there was actual firebombing, people were lighting trash cans on fire or spraying graffiti on the road and things like that, if they did that in that neighborhood or close to the Supreme Court, I don't think the police, I don't even think the media would just be like, oh, let's pretend we don't say anything. I think if something like that happened, you'd finally have an actual Joe Biden himself come out and actually make a statement, I think. And now this is a kind of added thing where if there actually are people involved in the thing, I think they would want to find a way to prevent it actually getting to that sort of thing. They don't want any actual occupation of spaces or lighting fires. They don't want it to get to that point because people might start connecting that with what the collectivists and the left did in Washington State to what's happening in Washington, D.C. now. Because you remember there was Chaz, the occupation of a couple of blocks. There was a court that was under assail, it was under attack for weeks, like burning fires and things like that. They don't want that connection coming. Because again, collectivist ideology relies on force to be applied in order to get what they want to actually happen. It's not about convincing people with words. It's about saying this is for the greater good and we get to force you to do this for your greater good. You don't want to remind people of that. Now the last section is terrorize until investigated as a terrorist. So think about this. The regressives have set the general feeling that investigation alone implies a certain level of guilt. They're not applying on that innocent until proven guilty type of mindset. It doesn't really apply when it comes to politics. Think about how much the investigations of Trump and his associates are still considered damning. They still say, yeah, look, we're still looking into, they found this court case, they're looking into this thing. It doesn't matter that they're found innocent. It doesn't matter that the cases were dropped. Just the fact that investigations began is enough for people to say, oh, that's smoke, so there's most definitely fire. Even though it's them bringing the smoke machines and blowing it around, that doesn't matter. Simple investigation in some cases, in several cases, already implies a level of guilt. So it's easy to do that. If it's someone you don't like, once they're investigated, you can fill out some actual thing in there. But now if it's somebody who's investigated on your side, what do you do? Think about the investigations of Hunter Biden right now. They're normally waived off. They're not claiming that he hasn't been proven guilty yet. They're not saying like, oh no, he hasn't proven guilty. Yes, there was some time where it's not really his laptop. That's his face and things like that. But okay, so go beyond that. But right now, they're not saying he hasn't been proven guilty yet. So let's just wait and see. But instead, they're saying, oh, he doesn't work for the government, and therefore his father is not implicated. There's no proof that that's the big guy in there. It's not actually discussed in there. So even though the general evidence is the same as it was back in 2020, now that there's an investigation, for a lot of people on the left, for a lot of regressives, now they're like, okay, yes, he's been found guilty. That's enough, but let's find ways around it. So with this particular case, the current situation going on right now with the Supreme Court, I don't think it's a lack of care for investigating it or a lack of investigation, but a lack of announcement that they're looking into how it is what it is. Like, they know what it is. We've seen it. It is violence for political needs. That's clearly what's going on. It's a fireball. Fireballing places. They're putting flyers out. So I think the Department of Justice and other people in the government, I think they know enough about who's involved in Jane's Revenge and others of these other activities, and they're already investigating that. Other people have investigated this. If other people can investigate this, I'm pretty sure the state has at least a few people, even simply just going out and reading what other people have investigated and keeping some kind of dossier on that. Like, there's a thread here that's going to be links somewhere in the description where you can find the article that I'm talking about here. It has a Twitter thread by Robert Evans, the only Robert Evans, and it just starts off with this. He says, earlier this week, the office in Wisconsin, the anti-abortion organization, was firebombed. I received a statement from the group claiming responsibility. They call themselves Jane's Revenge, a reference to the Jane Collective. There's an article here from CNN.com. CNN is known to have a decent relationship with people involved in the different Inquisition departments of the government. So there's kind of a rotating door. There's sources who are known, they extend sources, and there's leaked information. There's things like this that go back and forth. So if CNN knows this stuff, I'm sure the people at the government know this stuff. And so the CNN article is there. Robert Evans continues and says, this statement was sent to me through an anonymous intermediary that he trusts, so some link that he has. It is hosted on a Tor site. There's a link there if you want to check it out for yourself. The statement is titled First Communique, and opens with the words, this is not a declaration of war. So it starts off like this. You can read it for yourself later. It says, this is not declaration of war. War has been upon us for decades, a war which we did not want did not provoke. Too long have we been attacked for asking for basic medical care. Too long have we been shot, bombed, and forced into childbirth without consent. Okay, you can read more for that if you want. I want to get back into why there's not going to be a full announcement of an investigation. So this was back in May, and they've escalated since then. Some of y'all really think that the police state, that is the United States of America, does not have people looking into this? Come on. But if you do an official investigation, it's like saying there is such a thing as left-wing violence that is a threat. Yet, the general political rhetoric, the general idea, the general messaging is white supremacy is the biggest thing, mostly coming from the right. It's not something that is, on both sides. It's not they're bad people on both sides. It's no. It's not they're good people on both sides. It's just, no, there's one side that's bad, and we have to look into that side alone. So they don't want to remind people at this moment that this is a typical thing that they do investigate. And here now is from the Daily Caller, an article called Night of Rage. Eerie flyers pop up in D.C. ahead of Roe Vs Wade decision. A letter purportedly from Jane's Revenge and posted to the anarchist library says the impending decision is an event that should inspire rage in millions of people who can get pregnant. They can't say woman anymore. It's beautiful. Back to the quote. We need the state to feel our full wrath, the letter reads. We need them to be afraid of us. Whatever form your fury takes, the first step is feeling it. The next step is carrying that anger out into the world and expressing it physically. Consider this your call to action. On the night the final ruling is issued, a specific date we cannot yet predict, but we know is arriving imminently. We are asking for courageous hearts to come out after dark. So, just top cack, they can't actually say women anymore. I'm just thinking right now, if there was a women's march right now, I went to the women's march back in 2016 because I was there for the inauguration in DC as well. So I just did like a weekend and walked through it. What would they call it now? Would you be allowed to call it a women's march anymore? I don't know. Okay. And again here, these Jane's Revenge and posted it to the anarchist library. So yeah, you have these anarchists who are against the federal government saying that they should have less say on what people in the states can do. Like, that's completely what anarchy is about. That's as in anarchy of being against lawmakers that are not subject to their own laws. It's not just mumbled up chaos covering up for collectivism. That's just not what this is. For the Medicare, where's that medical care going to come from? Basic medical care. How is that going to happen if there are anarchists and no state to actually redistribute the actual funds to the public sector? These people are confused. There's very confused people here. I don't really understand what they're talking about. But again, words are magic spells to some of these people. Problems occur because of how people define X rather than what X is. So they might say something like forced, and it's not necessarily the same thing that you think it means to you. I've got a couple of posts just going into just what exactly do they mean when they say a forced pregnancy, because I wish somebody who says that would be able to sit down and try to explain to me, but I try to just think about what they could be possibly saying and use some statistics and things like that. The percentage of cases where I think force can be clearly actually in the actual conception was less than 0.01%, at least in this actual study. And then another study said the ones who are actually having this procedure done due to health problems of themselves or the actual health problems of the fetus itself, that was about 7%, which in my estimation still leaves a wide range of things that I wonder where is the actual force coming into this whole mentality, but people see the world in very diverse ways. So when you see these flyers going out saying DC call to action, night of rage, and probably going to be an image on the screen right now if you're watching the video version, the night SCOTUS overturns Roe Vs Wade, hit the streets, you said you'd riot. So yeah, I guess who said they'd riot? I don't know. So to our oppressors, if abortions aren't safe, you're not either. Jane's Revenge. Now this is something that I think it could be made, yeah, just by somebody in their office. They could just do this. It's not difficult to design something like this. Most people in the United States of America, middle class, upper middle class, and this is something happening in Bethesda, Maryland, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, I think PG County, Anne Arundel County. These counties around DC are relatively well off to get people in those sort of areas, or just in any urban area, suburbia, that have printers in their homes, have some basic knowledge to get a template online, or have some actual background graphic design knowledge. It's not hard to use some of these programs. They can design this very easily. I think it's a normal type of things. But I think the different Inquisition agencies had agents embedded in the January 6th protest. But what do you think? The protest which turned into riot, which turned into illegal breaching and entering the Capitol building. That whole thing. There's people involved in this. If you are like me and agree that they can afford already to have people embedded in Jane's Revenge, or some people actually watching these kind of groups already, over something like this that seems to have happened relatively fast. I think the leak of the brief that's coming out with this Roe vs. Wade thing was a couple of months ago, I guess, at least in May and things like that. And then now there's been protests and things like that since then. So this is relatively new. I think Jane's Revenge has been active outside of this particular thing. But they're watching these people. If they could watch these people over this, if they could send that letter out for the parents or whatever kind of investigation you think they're doing involved in this, you really think they didn't do it leading up to January 6th? Or things like Q, which developed over years? Which Q just looked like an op the whole time. It's like, what are people actually in this group? Okay, so they also don't want to remind people that at the time of the January 6th protest, the head of the Proud Boys at the time was an actually informant of one of the primary agencies of the current Inquisition. If they can afford to actually investigate this now, why have they not investigated the summer of 2020 with its mostly peaceful protests? Most of those protests were also in neighborhoods as well. And if this sort of activity can affect the Supreme Court of the United States ruling coming up, how did those protests affect the judge and juries in the Chauvin versus Floyd case and the many other cases going on at that time and since then? Why were they not able to actually get somebody inside Chaz before or during after the occupation in Seattle if they could just be like, yeah, we have people in Jane's Revenge right now. We managed to sneak people in there. We know these people are doing this. We know it. You can't actually just say you're doing this and actually just have people not think about that other things. So in this case, I look at the silence as actually a smart calculation. Don't announce any actual investigation. I know you're investigating these people already. Be super surprised if they're just not doing anything. Yes, they're incompetent. Yes, I don't think the best people are being in this. It's just recently they're talking about you hiring all these affirmative action and special kind of groups and that getting diversity in there with such an incompetent administration that I think in a silver lining of this, it's actually going to show people that, hey, it's the system itself that's corrupt. It's not, oh, let's actually just have the right people in there, the people who look like me. It's like, no. The system itself is corrupt. They're not going to be able to help you. People aren't really capable to have the sorts of powers that they claim to actually have. And Victor Davis Hanson said this thing, like if Joe Biden really was a lot slyer and things like this, he would just hire all white men, even old white men. Just hire all old white men and have them associated with the complete just bankruptcy of this administration and the failures and things like this and their policy. And the people are like, look, that's what we're telling you. Like the white people are ruining this country, so we need to put like diverse people in. But now these diverse people are going to be associated with this current administration, and it's not that good. I think you already see some people in the White House leaving, and there's things happening where I think some people realize, like, do we really want to be associated with this? Okay, so perception matters in life, and more so in politics. So we shall wait to see what happens with the ruling and the reaction to it. The ruling will come any day now, and there's already been one other big ruling that was going on. This was the Second Amendment. With the state of New York, I think there was some case where they said, okay, these people wanted to have their guns, a concealed carry permit, in public and not just in their home. And there were some issues going on. They were saying, okay, you have to prove a need of why you have it. And the people were saying, like, no, I don't have to prove it. My Second Amendment right, I should just be able to have a gun. And these people already had a permit for their homes. One of them was actually a trainer at a gun range and things like this, so very well versed in using guns. And the Supreme Court came in 6-3, and it said something like, "Yeah, I think this is it's a core right. It's not one of those secondary rights where you can say it's adjusting that much. It's a core right, so these people should actually have it, and that's going to affect a few states. So that's a big case, I think, for people more on the political right. And then Roe versus Wade, I think it's going to come out. I personally think it will come out as it was. I think there's going to be a drive within some of the people in the court. I heard some people like Robert Barnes saying there's people involved in the court like Justice Roberts, who is very invested in the prestige of the court, for the court to look like it's above being actually blackmailed in this way. Whoever leaked it, I don't think we're going to find out who actually leaked that thing out to the public, but I think whoever did that would be proven right that, oh, we can keep leaking things because, look, we leaked it and the people changed their minds. We went and protested and people changed their minds. So I think the people in the court would want to actually show them, like, look, we're going to stick to our guns. And normally these sorts of things, at that point it was leaked, they normally stay pretty close to actually what's going to be announced. So I think it would be unprecedented, but we are living in unprecedented times. I think ever since Trump got in, politics has been a whole different sort of ballgame with all the information age and the knowledge that people have and the increased demands that people have and the increased awareness that people have that these people, supposed illiterati, are really not that much better than us. They're actually very human, and in some cases they're actually less. Because you say this thing like, oh, you have an average of what people desire to want into a system, but the system itself selects for a certain kind of person. Even if somebody is really good, they're within that system involved with a lot of people that may not be selected for that average of average goodness. There's other people who are embedded in there that are in there for other reasons. And there's just many things where also if you say an average thing that might come out average good, it can also kind of skew to average bad. And then depends on who is voting versus the people who decide we're going to do things on our own. So I think people are realizing this system isn't as solid as some of them might have actually thought about before. Now, with the case itself, once it comes out, there's going to be these small, I think it's 10 million people who really care enough to actually support people to protest and do this kind of Jane's Revenge sort of thing in the United States of America. I think 10 million tops. Probably not even that much. 5 million, I'm like, yes, you actually need to protest and burn stuff down because it's an actual assault. Because with most people, most basically sensible people, even most of these people who currently imagine this thing where they currently say, oh, it's going to be completely illegal to actually have an abortion in any case whatsoever, that's not what this is about. Most people complaining do not know that the ruling simply kicks the decision back to state level. But again, perception matters. Right now, they think it's banning it and not necessarily a situation where it's like, hey, you have to do this and do it in a certain way. Right now, people understand some places marijuana is legal, some places it's not legal. Some places I think you can go to drive-through alcohol places. Some places you can't go drive-through alcohol places. There's different rules, different legalities to do different things in different states. This is something people in the United States of America are aware of. I also talked about, and again, I shall link those separate posts that I had about what forced means in a current year, in the current timeline, all these other options for people to do. Once this happens, I think other people will start. I've seen some people saying, okay, we're to have buses to bus women to the areas where they can actually get this procedure done. The general scientific knowledge about the development of the fetus has changed the calculus that most people have on when they're actually comfortable with this procedure being done. There's going to be other services saying, okay, we might have it illegal after the second trimester, but we're going to give you more knowledge towards things like safe haven laws. We're going to get systems where you can maybe do like an adoption even before the birth is there, where the people who want to adopt the kid will be able to support you through that process and things like this. There's different sorts of arrangements that I think are going to come that will assuage some of the fears of some of the people who are thinking this is going to be an end of the world, end of their world sort of thing. It's not going to assuage the fears of some of the highest people who support the ability and even encouragement of women to just get this procedure done and these pregnancies as often as possible for whatever reason at whatever time, which is more left-leaning, low-quality males who understand that if they do this, it raises their access to actual women who are willing to actually sleep with them without them having to actually go through certain levels of proving that they're actually worthwhile to actually deal with the potential result of having intercourse. So I think if you actually look at it, that is actually the strongest contingent who actually strongly support anytime, get this procedure, no questions asked. Perception matters again. For some people, they might have thought it was going to be women, younger women who are in that age range, but that's not actually the case. Most women are aware of how serious of a decision this is. Most women are smart enough and have access to the information to plan around this to reduce the chance of it happening when they're not ready for it to happen. You look at the general support within minorities and people who are normally supportive of the political left in the United States of America, and it's not that high for this. They really are more closer to that norm of saying, okay, after the second trimester, we don't really support it at that point. And I think that's what majority of the states will do. I think there'll be maybe a couple of them, maybe 5 or 6 of them that say like at no time whatsoever, but I think most of them will end up being around that kind of range of first trimester, no questions asked, and then after that, considerations for health of the fetus or health of the mother, or how the actual conception happened to begin with. And yeah, so I'm sticking with it. But then wait, with these investigations, I actually think about the people who are involved in this, and it turns out to be mostly white people who are actually doing these protests. And I'm wondering, is this the threat of white supremacy, white activism that we're actually being warned about? I don't think it is. So I think y'all are right. You're right to kind of mock the pearl clutching that's going on with this, because as I mentioned in all these things, it's not as bad as people think it's going to actually be. Being able to travel and move to another location in order to get this very serious procedure done is something most people would actually be able to actually do. Things like those hotlines will come up where you can actually call and somebody will actually go out. It's not going to be like, oh, it's going to deliver the horse pills to you and things like that. Or like, no, I think it's good to get to that point. I think it'll be more streamlined, whether you like the procedure or not. But I think that will happen and it's not going to be as bad. People have other important things in their lives rather than to worry about this particular thing, which in my estimation, after that first trimester is a situation about ending a life, and most people who do this don't take it lightly. Yes, the few people who cheer and celebrate it and go like on social medias and things like this and get likes and shares. No, that's a fraction of people I think in the world right there, and those people are sick and disturbed anyway. So with this or not, you don't want to be around that sort of person. I would estimate I wouldn't want to be around that sort of person. Okay, so I think the speed drawing that's going on this week, you'd have seen if you're watching the video version, it's just an image of some of the people who are involved in this type of thing. And I don't think, you look at this actual thing, do they scare you? When you look at the things going on at Kavanaugh's home with the Handmaid's Tale people, these people just live in some fantasy type of worlds. Are these scary people? And I know it just takes one crazy person, one person to infiltrate these groups or to hear that message and go out there, and they can actually create some great harm, even fatal harm. But the vast majority of people involved in these type of things are performative. It's hashtag activism, hashtag activism, hashtivism. That kind of thing is what they're mostly involved with. To actually go out there. Most of these people who think, if you're in a situation where you can't know your body enough or know the person you're having intercourse with enough to discuss and plan around potentially starting a life, you're probably not going to be invested enough in your personal life and organizing and doing other things to actually go out and do anything significant. You're not going to see a coup from these type of people. It's not going to be that bad. Firebombing, those family centers and things like this, yes, it's horrible. Going into these different groups and things and attacking them, yes, that's horrible. But this is not a massive scale thing. This is a small group of people. These people still need to be addressed, still need to be dealt with, still need to be avoided, still need to be informed about certain things. But I think it needs to be done to the right level of concern with their actual threat and with their actual activity level. Now, to finish off, I'm going to go with 3 questions from economist Thomas Sowell. There's also merchandise where you can get these 3 questions and shirts and things like this. You can get a lot of other merchandise, some others Thomas Sowell images and other things like that in the description wherever you're getting this. You can find it or you go to store.carbon33.com as well. But the 3 questions he asks are, at what cost, compared to what, and what solid proof do you have? He normally asks people on the political left about the economic questions that they have, but I think economics, just calculating positives, negatives, weighing cost-benefit analyses of things, this happens on other levels of life. So I like applying them on other things. So in this situation, you're saying they should investigate this. At what cost? What is the time and money and manpower you want to put towards investigating the 50 or so people that show up in Kavanaugh's place? How big is Jane's revenge to do it at a national level, Department of Justice level? What is the actual sort of thing you want involved in that? For example, there was a bill that was passed through, a proposal that passed through Congress saying, okay, we need more protection from Supreme Court justices and their families. And then people said, okay, also federal judges at the lower level of the courts need to have it. So how long will this thing keep growing to say, okay, now we actually need protection from all these people? If you think they should have it, well and good. But at what actual cost do you think it needs to be done for the actual threat that's actually there? So compared to what? People often quote what was happening with the families, but I said that was a letter. I don't think there was any actual investigation. Yes, you have biases in this, in my estimation, more left-leaning biases where they investigate certain things and choose not to investigate others. But what is the actual comparison of something similar to this that you actually think was actually investigated at a level that you are actually comfortable with? And if they actually do announce an investigation, what do you think would improve in the situation of actually doing an actual investigation? And I think that goes with the last question of what solid proof do you have? What solid proof does anyone have that they're not already being investigated? Just because there's no press release doesn't mean it's not happening. We already learned this with the Hunter Biden thing. Just because the press was saying it's nothing doesn't mean it wasn't something. Till next time, goodbye.